I picked up those moving boxes, every single one of them, carried them back to my front porch, and set them down in the rain. My daughter-in-law stood in my hallway with her mouth open. My son couldn't look me in the eye. Nobody said a word. Because nobody expected the quiet 69-year-old widow to fight back. They walked into my home assuming I would fold. They brought paperwork, they brought boxes, they brought excuses, and they called it family. What happened next changed everything. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if no one's ever told you that your story matters, subscribe, because I'm going to tell you that every single week. Let me tell you something about the house on Ridgeline Road. It is not a grand house. It is not the kind of place you see on the cover of a magazine. The paint on the shutters has faded to a soft gray blue that I've always meant to repaint and never actually gotten around to. The front porch sags a little on the left side, where Robert always meant to fix the boards and never did. There is a crack in the kitchen tile near the stove, thin, barely noticeable from the winter of 1987, when the ground froze so hard that something shifted beneath the foundation. I never fixed that crack, because Robert said it gave the house character. And after he was gone, I couldn't bring myself to cover something he had touched with his hands and laughed about on a Tuesday morning over coffee. That crack is part of my house the same way my memory of him is part of my heart. I have lived inside those walls for 43 years. I raised Nathan in that house. I nursed Robert through his illness in that house. I buried my husband from that house and came home to it afterward, sat on the kitchen floor at 10 o'clock at night, and cried until I had nothing left inside me. And then I got up, because the house was still standing. And I needed to stand with it. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened the afternoon. Nathan and Claire walked through my front door. I want you to understand that I am not a dramatic woman. I am not the kind of mother who calls her son every day, or shows up uninvited, or makes her feelings the loudest thing in the room. I gave Nathan his space. I respected his marriage. I welcomed Claire into my home the first time Nathan brought her to meet me, made her pot roast and sweet tea, showed her the garden, handed her the good china because I wanted her to feel like she belonged. I did everything right. I say that not to pat myself on the back, but because what came next had nothing to do with anything I did wrong. It was a Thursday in October, the kind of October afternoon that makes you feel like Asheville was invented specifically for this purpose, the light coming down through the trees at that particular angle, warm and low, the kind of light that makes even ordinary things look like they matter. I was in the garden when I heard the car. I heard 2 doors close. I heard voices. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked around the side of the house, and there they were, Nathan and Claire, coming up the front walk with coffee cups in their hands and something in their posture that I couldn't immediately name. Later I would name it ownership, but in that moment I just smiled. "This is a surprise," I said. "You didn't call, we wanted to see you." Nathan kissed my cheek. He smelled like the same aftershave he's worn since college cedar and something faintly sweet. It made me feel for 1 second like he was 22 years old again and everything was simple. Claire hugged me. She was wearing a new coat, camel-colored, expensive-looking. She pulled back and held both my hands and looked at me with that particular smile. She has the one that feels warm right up until you start wondering what's underneath it. "Margaret, your garden is just incredible. I mean it. Every time I come out here I forget how beautiful it is." "Thank you, sweetheart. Come inside. I'll put on more coffee." We went inside, and that was when everything started to change. Claire walked into my living room, the way people walk through a house they're already thinking about rearranging. I noticed it but didn't say anything yet. She touched the mantel above the fireplace, ran her fingers along the carved wood, the same wood that Robert and I picked out together from an estate sale in Weaverville in 1982. She stood at the big windows overlooking the back garden, and was quiet for a moment, the afternoon light falling across her face. "This house," she said. I waited. "It is seriously perfect, Margaret. I mean it. The bones of this place, there is just nothing like it." I thanked her. I meant it. The house was perfect tonight. Then she turned around, and she said the thing that stopped my heart. "My mother would love that downstairs bedroom. It gets morning light, right? Nathan and I could take the master. The attic, God, I've been thinking about this. The attic would make the most incredible home office." The coffee cup was halfway to my mouth. I put it down very slowly, because I needed my hands to be steady. I looked at Claire. I looked at her face. She was not speaking the way people speak when they're imagining something hypothetical. She was not saying, "Wouldn't it be funny if," or "Imagine if someday." She was speaking the way someone speaks when they are already 10 steps ahead of you in a plan you were never invited to join. I looked at Nathan. He was looking at his coffee. I said, "Very carefully, Claire. When did this become your house? She laughed, actually laughed, light, easy, dismissive. Like I'd said something charmingly naive. Oh, Margaret, don't be dramatic. We're family. There it was. We're family. I have been alive for 69 years. I have heard those 2 words used to justify more violations than I can count. Where family means you'll share your dessert with someone who didn't save room. Where family means you'll drive 2 hours on Christmas Eve because someone asked you to. Those things are true, but where family does not mean your name gets erased from your own front door. I looked at my son again, still looking at his coffee. Nathan, he looked up. Did you hear what your wife just said? Mom, she assigned rooms. In my house. Did you hear that? Let's calm down for a second. I am perfectly calm. I looked back at Claire. I'd like to understand what's happening here, because it sounds like a conversation was had without me. Claire sat down, set her coffee cup down, crossed her legs. She had the posture of someone who had prepared for this moment. Margaret, we've been wanting to talk to you about something for a little while. And I know this might be a surprise, but if you hear us out, I'm listening. Nathan and I have been struggling. You know that. Rent in Charlotte has gotten absolutely insane. We're paying nearly $3,000 a month for 1,200 square feet, which is it's not sustainable. And with the interest rates, buying right now is practically... Claire, she stopped. I understand about rent. I understand about interest rates. That is a real problem that real people have, and I have sympathy for it. But I want you to go back to the beginning of this conversation, to the moment you walked through my front door. And I want you to tell me honestly whether you came here today to ask me something, or to tell me something. She opened her mouth. She closed it. Nathan put his coffee down on the side table and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Mom, the house is huge. You're here alone. 5 bedrooms, and it's just you. It doesn't make sense. I turned to look at my son. This is the part that hurt. Not Claire. Claire, I had known for 8 years long enough to love her in the complicated way you love someone who is both a stranger and family, someone who came into your life through your child and will always be slightly opaque to you. Claire's agenda surprised me, but it did not destroy me. My son's silence, his willingness to sit there while his wife divided up my home and say nothing, look away, stare at his shoes that went somewhere much deeper. It doesn't make sense, I said slowly, repeating his words back to him. Your mother living in the house your father built with his own hands doesn't make sense. Is that what you're telling me? That's not what I said. It's what you meant. He ran a hand through his hair. He looked tired. Nathan had been looking tired. For a while there were new lines around his eyes, something worn through in his expression that hadn't been there 5 years ago. I noticed it, I worried about it, but I also understood in that moment that tired people sometimes make desperate plans and call them reasonable. Mom, we're not asking you to leave. We're saying we could all be together. You wouldn't be alone anymore, Nathan. I stood up. I am going to say something once clearly, so that no one in this room can say later that there was any confusion. This house belongs to me. I will decide what happens under this roof. And no, I am not going to discuss arrangements for rooms and offices and your mother-in-law's light exposure, because this is not a property for you to arrange. It is my home, and I am asking you both right now to let this go. Silence. Claire's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Nathan said nothing. After a moment, Claire picked up her coffee cup, took a long sip, and smiled at me over the rim. Of course, Margaret, we hear you, but her eyes said something different. And I knew, standing there in my own living room, that this was not over. They left an hour later. I walked through my house after they drove away. Through the kitchen, past the cracked tile, through the living room, past Robert's chair, down the hallway where Nathan's school photographs still hung 1st grade, 3rd grade, 7th grade, the gap-toothed grin that eventually became the tired man who had just sat on my sofa and looked at his shoes. I stood at the window and watched the last of the October light fade out of the trees. I kept thinking about the way Claire had touched the mantel, like she was already measuring the space. The next morning, I was drinking my first cup of coffee when I heard a car in the driveway. No call, no text, no warning. I looked out the window. Claire's car. I set down my mug. She knocked twice and opened the door. She always did that. Knocked and entered simultaneously, which I had let go for years, because I wanted to be the kind of mother-in-law who was welcoming, who didn't make small issues into large ones. I understood that morning that my generosity had been mistaken for permission. I heard the sound before I saw what was happening. Cardboard scraping sound, how heavy, rhythmic. I walked into the hallway. There were boxes, not 1 or 2, not the kind of boxes you use to bring someone a gift or help organize a closet. Moving boxes, the kind you get from U-Haul, flat-folded and stacked, the kind that exist for one specific purpose. Claire was carrying an armful of them through my front door. She looked up at me and smiled. Morning. I thought I'd get a head start. Once we get the big stuff moved, it'll be a lot easier to. Stop, she stopped, put those down. Something shifted behind her eyes. But she set the boxes down. Margaret, I want you to listen to me. Carefully, I told you yesterday that this conversation was over. I told you this is my home and we were not discussing any kind of arrangement. Do you remember that? Yes, but I thought, what did you think? She took a breath, reset. The smile came back, softer, more patient, the kind of smile you use on someone you're managing rather than talking to. I thought after a night to sleep on it you might feel differently. Change is scary, Margaret, I get it. But, change, I said the word like I was setting it on a shelf between us to look at. Claire, you are not describing change, you are describing an invasion. You are standing in my hallway with moving boxes on a Friday morning, without an invitation, without a phone call, without a single thought about what I want. That is not change, that is something else. Her chin went up slightly. You're living alone in a 5-bedroom house.
Yes.
I am, because I own it, and it's not practical. It is not your job to decide what is practical for my life. And we thought that together we could. Claire. My voice was very quiet now. Quiet in the way that means the conversation has reached its bottom. There is no together here. You did not consult me. You did not ask me, you decided, and then you arrived with boxes, and you are now standing in my home as though the decision has already been made. I need you to hear me clearly, it has not. I am not moving to a guest room in my own house. I am not reorganizing my life around your financial situation. And I need you to take those boxes back to your car right now. The smile was completely gone. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up the boxes, one at a time, and she carried them back out to her car without a word. I stood in my hallway until I heard her engine start and the car back out of the driveway. Then I sat down on the bottom stair, the same stair where Nathan used to sit as a little boy to put on his sneakers before school, and I held my own hands and breathed. Because I was shaking, not from fear, from the effort of staying steady when everything in me wanted to break. Nathan called that afternoon. I saw his name on the screen and let it ring twice before I answered. Hey Mom, Nathan. A pause. Claire told me what happened this morning. Good, then we're both informed, Mom. His voice had that tone, the careful, patient, slightly wounded tone he has used since he was a teenager when he wanted something and knew he was going to have to work for it. Why are you making this so difficult? And there it was. That sentence, I have turned it over in my mind many times since that day. Why are you making this so difficult? As though I were the one who had shown up at someone's home uninvited with moving boxes. As though the difficulty had originated with me. Nathan, I said, I want you to think very carefully about what you just said to me. Your wife came to my house this morning without calling. She brought moving boxes. She began carrying them inside. I asked her to leave, and you are asking me why I am making this difficult. Silence. She was trying to help. She was not trying to help me. She was trying to help herself. There is a difference. And I think you know there's a difference. And I think on some level it is painful for you to admit that. So instead you are calling me and telling me that I am the problem. More silence. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Mom, the rent is killing us. I'm not exaggerating. We are barely keeping our heads above water. And you have this big house and you're alone. And it just seems like what? Like the logical solution. Logical, I let the word sit. Nathan, I understand that you are struggling. I hear that. And it breaks my heart because you are my son, and your pain is my pain, and I would do a great many things to make your life easier. But there is a reason you don't move into someone's home without asking them. There is a reason you don't assign rooms in a house that doesn't belong to you. There is a reason you don't send your wife over with moving boxes before the other person has said yes. And the reason is that the other person, the person whose house it is, has not said yes. You could say, yes, I could, but I'm not going to. Not like this, not after this. Mom, my home is not an emergency solution, Nathan. It is my life. Do you understand the difference? This house is the place where your father and I built something. Where I held you when you were sick. Where I came home after your father's funeral and sat on the kitchen floor and figured out how to keep living. This is not a spare bedroom. This is everything I have left of the person I was before I lost him. And you are asking me to hand it over because rent in Charlotte is too high. The line was quiet for a long time. I wasn't asking you to hand it over. Then what were you asking? He didn't answer. Because he knew. On some level, underneath the exhaustion and the financial pressure and the convenient story he'd told himself about logistics and practicality, on some level, he knew exactly what had been happening, and he didn't have an answer for it. Nathan, I said finally, and my voice was softer now, because he was still my child and that never stops being true. When I say no, I am not choosing a house over my family. I am choosing to respect myself, and I need you to sit with that for a while. Because someday I hope a very long time from now I will be gone. And the things I want you to remember about your mother are not that she kept a nice garden. I want you to remember that she knew her own worth. That she did not disappear when someone needed her to. That she taught you, by example, what it looks like to hold your ground with love. He didn't say anything for a while. Then quietly, "I hear you, Mom." Good, we hung up. I sat in Robert's chair for a long time. Outside, the afternoon was going golden in the way it does in October in Asheville. Everything slow and amber. The trees holding their color before the let it go. I thought about all the mornings I had sat in this room alone since Robert died. The strange, specific silence of a house that used to be full of sound. The way you learn slowly to hear your own thoughts again. The way solitude stops being loneliness and becomes something else, something quieter and more honest. Something you would not trade even for the comfort of noise. I thought about Claire's hands on my mantle. I thought about the boxes in my hallway. And I thought, not yet, not ever, not like this. 2 days passed, they felt like a held breath. I worked in the garden. I called my friend Patrice in Weaverville and talked for an hour about nothing and everything. I went to the library and checked out 2 novels and read 40 pages of the first one in bed with a cup of chamomile tea. I was doing what I have always done when something large is pressing on me. I was living. Quietly, stubbornly, determinedly living. On the 3rd day, Claire called. "Margaret, I want to apologize for the way things went the other day. I was moving too fast. I get excited about solutions and I forget that other people need time." I appreciated the apology. I told her so. "I appreciate you saying that, Claire. I just a pause. Can we start over? Can I come over and we just talk? Just talk. No boxes, I promise. You can come over Thursday?" "Thursday is fine." She came Thursday. She brought flowers, garden roses from the farmer's market, pale pink, the kind I like. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and folded her hands and looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. Something underneath the usual confidence, something almost like discomfort. "I know I overstepped," she said. "Yes, Margaret, we're really in a tight spot. And when I look at this house, and I think about my mother, who's also alone, who's not getting any younger, I think about how it could work for everyone. I do, I genuinely believe that. I believe you believe it." She paused. "But you don't. I think you are very good at seeing what works for you, Claire. I think you are slightly less practiced at seeing what works for other people. And I think when you look at my house, what you see is a solution to your problem. What I see is my life." She was quiet for a moment. "What would it take?" she asked. "What would I have to offer you for this to work?" I looked at her. "Claire, that's not how this works. This is not a negotiation. This is my home. I don't have terms you can meet. I have a life I have built, and it does not have room in it for being rearranged. So there's nothing. There is nothing." She looked at her hands. Then she looked back up at me, and I saw something passing across her face so quickly I almost missed it. A calculation, a shift, the look of someone who has just decided to try a different door. "I understand," she said. And she smiled. And she picked up her roses and thanked me for the tea. I walked her to the door, watched her car disappear down the road, went back inside, locked the door, not because I was afraid of Claire, but because I had just seen something in her eyes that told me I was not done yet. And I was right. I have lived long enough to know that when someone stops arguing with you, it does not always mean they have stopped. Sometimes it means they have simply moved to a room you can't see. The call came from my attorney, Gerald Marsh, on a Tuesday morning. Gerald had handled Robert's estate for us, and I had kept him on retainer for small things over the years, a lease dispute with a neighboring property, the updating of my will after Robert died, small things, routine things. He did not sound routine on the phone. "Margaret, I've received something I think you need to know about." Someone reached out to my office, not to me directly, but through a paralegal inquiring about the process for initiating a conservatorship in North Carolina. I set down my coffee. A conservatorship, yes, for an elderly person, concerning questions about capacity to manage property. The room was very still. "Who was it?" Gerald cleared his throat. The inquiry was anonymous officially, but the paralegal described the person who came in. Young woman, late 30s, dark coat. I sat down. Because my legs had gone uncertain, I sat down in Robert's chair and held the phone with both hands and breathed. "Gerald," I said when I trusted my voice, "what does that mean? A conservatorship, what exactly does that mean for this house?" If a court were to grant conservatorship, another party would be given legal authority to make decisions about your assets, including real property, including the house. On what grounds? They'd have to demonstrate diminished capacity, inability to manage your own affairs. I almost laughed. I was 69 years old. I gardened, I drove, I volunteered, I read. I managed my own accounts. I had never once, not for one single day, been unable to manage my own affairs. But I also understood exactly what this inquiry meant. It meant the direct approach had failed, and now someone was looking for another way in. "Gerald," I said, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to make sure everything is airtight. The will, the estate plan, all of it. If someone is looking for a door, I want every door bolted." "Already thinking the same thing, Margaret. Can you come in Thursday?" "I can come in Thursday." I hung up. I sat in Robert's chair for a very long time. Outside, the garden was bare the way November gardens are, spare and skeletal and honest. Nothing hidden, nothing prettified, just the clean lines of what things actually are. I looked at it. I thought about Claire's face when she left my house, that passing calculation, that small shift in her eyes. I thought about the moving boxes in my hallway. I thought about Nathan staring at his shoes. And something settled in me, something quiet and certain and iron. I was not going to lose this house, not to financial pressure, not to manipulation, not to legal maneuvering, not to anyone. This was where Robert and I had lived. This was where Nathan had grown up. This was where I had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to me, and where I had slowly, day by day and cup of coffee by cup of coffee, built myself back up. This house was mine, and I was not going to give it up without a fight. Thursday came. I drove myself to Gerald Marsh's office on Pack Square, the same office I had sat in with Robert 30 years ago when we were updating our wills and arguing pleasantly about who should be executor. Robert wanted his brother Dale. I wanted Patrice. We compromised on Gerald himself, which Robert said was cheating and I said was practical. We laughed about it in the car on the way home. I did not laugh on the way there this time. Gerald is a careful man. He has been a careful man for the 40 years I have known him, measured in his words, precise in his thinking, the kind of attorney who never says anything twice because he says it correctly the first time. When I walked into his office and he stood up from behind his desk and looked at me with that particular expression, the one that lives between professional concern and genuine alarm, I understood that what he was about to tell me was worse than what I had prepared myself for on the drive over. "Sit down, Margaret." I sat. "I've done some more digging since we spoke Tuesday. The anonymous inquiry to my paralegal, I was able to trace it a little further than I initially let on the phone, because I didn't want to alarm you before I was certain. And now you're certain. The inquiry originated from a law firm in Charlotte, a small firm, family law and estate planning, that's has a history of taking on conservatorship cases." He paused. "The person who made the inquiry did not give a name, but they asked very specific questions about the process for petitioning a court to appoint a conservator, an elderly person who lives alone and may lack the capacity to make sound financial decisions. I listened to every word. I kept my hands very still in my lap. They asked," Gerald continued, "what kind of evidence would be required to demonstrate diminished capacity. They asked how long the process typically takes. They asked what rights the subject of the petition has to contest it." Another pause. "And they asked what happens to real property, specifically a house, during and after the conservatorship process." The room was absolutely silent. "Gerald, what does that last part mean, practically? If a conservatorship were granted, what actually happens to the house? If a court appoints a conservator and grants them authority over your assets, that conservator would have legal control over decisions involving the house. They could decide to sell it, rent it, transfer it. You would retain ownership on paper, theoretically, but the conservator would have authority over how it's used and managed. And who would the conservator be? That's at the discretion of the court. But petitioners often suggest a family member." I looked at him steadily. "So what you're telling me is that someone connected to a Charlotte law firm is exploring whether they can use the court system to take control of my house." Gerald did not look away. "That is what I'm telling you." I thought about Claire's face, that small calculation passing behind her eyes when she stood at my front door with her roses and her apology. The way she'd said "I understand" in a voice that meant nothing of the kind. "What do I need to do?" Gerald opened a folder on his desk. "Several things. First, we update your estate documents, will, durable power of attorney, healthcare directive, all of it comprehensive and current. Second, I want you to establish a paper trail demonstrating your capacity. Regular medical checkups documented, financial management, your accounts, your bills, all in order and clearly self-managed. Third," he looked up, "is there anyone you trust completely? Someone who could serve as your designated power of attorney right now, today, if it came to that?" I thought of Patrice. "Yes, then we do that paperwork first." I spent 2 hours in Gerald's office that Thursday morning. I signed things, I initialed things, I answered questions about my medical history, my financial accounts, my daily life, in the kind of detail that would have felt invasive from anyone other than a man I'd trusted for 4 decades. When I walked out onto Pack Square, the November air hit my face and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just breathed. 69 years old, widowed, living alone on Ridgeline Road, and I had just spent my morning defending my right to exist in my own home. I called Patrice from the car. She picked up on the second ring. "Mag, what's wrong?" It was not a question. Patrice has known me since 1978. She hears things in my voice that I don't put into words. "I need to tell you something. I'm listening." I told her everything. All of it, from the Thursday afternoon, when Nathan and Claire walked in with their coffee cups, to the boxes in my hallway, to Gerald's phone call Tuesday morning, to what he'd told me today. I told it in order, the way it had happened, because I needed to hear it in sequence. Myself needed to hear the whole shape of it laid out end to end so that I could understand what I was actually dealing with. When I finished, there was a silence on the line. Then Patrice said very quietly, "That woman." "Yes, Margaret, you know what this is. You know exactly what this is." "I know. She went to a lawyer, someone connected to a lawyer." "Don't split that hair." "She went looking for a way to take your house through the courts when the front door didn't work." "I know, Patrice. Does Nathan know?" That was the question I had been sitting with all morning. Did Nathan know? Was he part of this? Or was he, as I wanted with everything in me to believe, simply a man too exhausted and too conflict-averse to understand what was happening around him? "I don't know," I said honestly. "You need to find out." "I know that too." And Mag, Patrice's voice shifted. Softer, the voice she used when we were young and one of us was hurting, and the other one needed to say something real. "You are not alone in this, you hear me? Whatever this becomes, you are not alone." I gripped the steering wheel with both hands. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just don't you dare let them have that house." I almost smiled. "I have no intention." I drove home. And I started making a plan. The plan was simple, not easy simple. There is a difference. Easy means it doesn't cost you anything. Simple means you know what to do, even when it costs you a great deal. I was going to protect my home. I was going to do it legally, thoroughly, and without apology. And I was going to find out one way or another exactly how much my son knew about what his wife was planning. That last part was the hardest, because asking your child if he betrayed you requires being prepared for either answer. I waited 2 days, want to be calm, not cold calm. There is a difference there too. Cold is a wall, calm is a foundation. I needed a foundation for this conversation, not a wall. I called Nathan on a Saturday morning when I knew Claire would be at her yoga class. She went every Saturday at 9. It was her one firm, non-negotiable routine, the one thing she maintained regardless of what else was happening in her life, which I had always respected and which I now found simply convenient. Nathan picked up on the third ring. "Mom, hey, Nathan." "Are you alone?" A pause, just a half second, but I heard it. "Yeah, Claire's at yoga." "Why?" "I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to be honest with me." Not careful, not diplomatic honest. Another pause. Longer. "Okay. Did you know that someone connected to your household made inquiries with a law firm in Charlotte about initiating a conservatorship proceeding against me?" The silence that followed was not the silence of a man who didn't understand the question. It was the silence of a man who had just been caught in the orbit of something he couldn't escape. "Nathan, Mom, did you know?" I didn't know she was actually going to do anything. She mentioned it once, that there might be legal options, and I told her, Mom, that was crazy. "But you didn't tell me." The silence again. "You knew she was researching this and you did not call me." "I thought it was just talk. I thought she was venting." "She gets like that. She says things when she's frustrated." "Nathan's, stop." My voice was very quiet now and he heard it because he stopped immediately. "I'm going to tell you something and I need you to really hear it. Not process it through whatever story you've been telling yourself about keeping the peace or not wanting to make things worse. I need you to hear me directly. Your wife went to a lawyer's office. She asked about how to take legal control of my home, and you knew she was thinking about it, and you did not warn me. That is not keeping the peace, that is choosing her side. And I need you to understand what it means that your mother had to hear this from her attorney and not from her son." I heard him exhale a long, unsteady breath. "Mom, I'm sorry, I know you are. I know you didn't." "That is also a problem, Nathan. It is a problem that in this situation with my home, my life, the place your father built, you did not think. You did not think far enough ahead to protect me, and I need you to sit with that. Not explain it to me, sit with it." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "What are you going to do?" "I have already done it. My attorney has secured everything. There is nothing anyone can do legally to challenge my ownership or my capacity, and if anyone tries, they will discover that I have been preparing for this for years." Your father was not a naive man, Nathan. He made sure I was protected. And so did I, Mom. His voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry, I believe you, I meant it. I also meant what I said next, but being sorry is the beginning. Not the end. I need you to decide something about where you stand, about who you are in this situation. Because right now, Nathan, you are standing in the middle of a road and a car is coming, and eventually you are going to have to move. I let him sit with that. We said goodbye. I hung up. And then I did something I hadn't let myself do through any of this. I went to the kitchen and I sat down at the table and I cried. Not from sadness exactly, it was more complicated than sadness. It was grief for something I'd spent years trying not to admit, that the relationship between a mother and her adult child is one of the most fragile things in the world, and that loving someone does not protect you from them. I cried for Robert. I cried because he would have known exactly what to say to Nathan, and he would have said it without hesitation, the way he did everything directly, and with love and without apology. I cried because he wasn't here, and then I stopped. Because crying does not bolt the doors, only I could do that. The week that followed felt like walking through a house where someone had rearranged the furniture in the dark. Everything was in the wrong place. Nathan called twice, and I answered once. Claire did not call at all. Patrice came over Tuesday evening, and we sat in the kitchen and ate soup, and she talked about her grandchildren, and I let the normalcy of it wash over me like something medicinal. On Wednesday, something happened that I was not prepared for. I was in the library. I volunteer there on Wednesday mornings, helping with the children's reading hour, and my phone buzzed in my pocket. A number I didn't recognize, a Charlotte area code. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the voicemail in my car afterward. It was a woman's voice, professional, measured, careful in the way of someone who chooses words for a living. Good morning, this message is for Margaret Collins. My name is Diane Farrell. I'm a family law attorney in Charlotte. I've been retained by a client to discuss some matters relating to estate planning and family arrangements that may involve you. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. My number is— I did not write down the number. I called Gerald Marsh. Gerald, a woman named Diane Farrell, just left me a voicemail. She says she's been retained by a client to discuss estate planning and family arrangements involving me. A beat of silence. Don't call her back. I wasn't going to. Good. Forward me the voicemail. I'll reach out to her office directly and make clear that you are represented and that any contact goes through me. What does it mean that she called me directly? It means either she doesn't know you have an attorney or she was hoping to speak with you before you could consult one. Neither reflects well on her client. I thought about Claire, about the calculation in her eyes, about the moving boxes in my hallway, about the way she had stood in my living room and divided up my home out loud while my son looked at his shoes. Gerald, how serious is this? Serious enough that I'm glad we spent Thursday buttoning everything up. But Margaret, with everything in order, a conservatorship petition against you would go nowhere. You have full capacity. You manage your own affairs. Your health is documented. There is no legal basis. Then why is she pursuing it? Sometimes people pursue things hoping you don't know enough to fight back. A pause. You know enough. I drove home. I went to my garden. It was late November, bare and cold, but there are things you do, even in a bare November garden, things to cut back, and things to mulch, and things to prepare for what comes in spring. I worked for an hour. My hands got cold. I didn't stop. Because here is something I have learned in 69 years. You do not wait for spring to take care of what needs taking care of. You do the work in the cold. You prepare the ground when it is hard and uninviting, because the ground doesn't care whether you're comfortable. The ground just waits to see whether you showed up. I showed up. I always showed up. On Thursday evening, Nathan came to my house. Unannounced, which he never does. Nathan always calls ahead. It is one of the things about him that has remained constant since he was a teenager. He is, underneath everything, a courteous person. The fact that he drove up my road without calling told me that something had shifted. I heard the knock and opened the door, and he was standing on my porch in the November dark, his coat open over a wrinkled shirt, his hair uncombed, looking more like the 17-year-old version of himself than he had in 20 years. Can I come in? I stepped back from the door. He came inside. He didn't take off his coat. He stood in my hallway and looked at me with an expression. I could not immediately read something between guilt and determination and something else. Something new. I found out today, he said. I waited. About the lawyer, about Farrell. He said the name like it tasted wrong in his mouth. I didn't know she'd actually retained someone. She told me she was just looking into options. I didn't know she'd actually— He stopped. I called her from the parking lot of my office and I told her to stop. Today I told her this was over. I studied his face. How did she react? He gave a short, humorless sound. Not quite a laugh. She told me I was being dramatic. That she was just protecting our interests, that you weren't thinking clearly about the future. And what did you say? He met my eyes. I told her that you are the clearest thinking person I know, and that if she didn't call Farrell's office today and terminate the arrangement, I would. The hallway was very quiet. Did she? I don't know yet. But I meant it, Mom. If she hasn't called by tomorrow, I will. I looked at my son for a long moment, 41 years old. Tired standing in my hallway without his coat buttoned. Telling me finally something I needed to hear. Nathan, I said. Come sit down. We went to the kitchen. I made tea, because that is what I do in my kitchen. When something important is happening, I put on the kettle. I get out the mugs. I let the ordinary ritual of it settle the air around me. Nathan sat at the table and watched me do it and didn't say anything. I put a mug in front of him and sat across from him. Tell me how things really are, I said. Not the version where it's about rent prices. The real version. He wrapped both hands around the mug. We've been in trouble for 2 years, not just money trouble. Real trouble. Claire and I we're not in a good place. We haven't been in a good place for a while, and when she came up with this idea about the house, I think I let it go further than I should have, because I was desperate for there to be a solution to something. Any solution, even a bad one. I listened. She has a way of making things sound reasonable that aren't reasonable. I've lived with that for 8 years, and I know it, and I still let it happen. And that's on me. I'm not saying this to make excuses for her. I'm saying it because you deserve to know the truth about what happened. Does she love you? I asked. He looked down at his mug. I think she loves the life she thought we'd have. I don't know how much she loves what we actually have. That is a hard thing for any child to say to a parent. The kind of admission that costs something real. I felt the weight of it across the table. Nathan, me, he looked up. I am your mother. I will be your mother until the last breath I take. Whatever happens with Claire, whatever happens with your marriage, you call me. You come here. You do not let yourself drown quietly because you're afraid to ask for help. Do you understand me? His jaw worked. Yeah, I'm not finished. You also never, not once, not for any reason, no matter how desperate things get you. Never let someone use you to come after what is mine. The house, not my dignity, not my right to live in my own home on my own terms. Do you understand that too? Yes, say it like you mean it. Yes, Mom, I understand. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. He turned his hand over and held mine. We sat there for a while. The kettle on the stove had gone quiet. The house held us, the way it always had, the creak of the floorboards, the particular hush of November pressing in at the windows, the familiar smell of old wood and my good soap and something underneath it, all that I have never been able to name, but that I think is simply the accumulated scent of years of living. Robert's chair was visible through the kitchen doorway. I looked at it while I held my son's hand, and I thought, we are still here. Both of us in this house, in this kitchen, we are still here. But whatever I believed in that kitchen that evening, whatever fragile, hopeful, carefully rebuilt thing, I thought Nathan and I had arrived at the morning, had other plans. Because Claire came the next day, not with roses this time. Not with boxes, not with apologies or calculations hiding behind soft smiles. She came with a folder. She knocked once, opened the door, still that habit, knock and enter, as though my home were a place she had perpetual access to, and she walked into my living room in her camel coat, and she set a folder on my coffee table. I was standing in the kitchen doorway when she came in. I had heard the door and I had not moved. Something in me knew before I even saw the folder that whatever came next was going to require me to be still. Claire, Margaret, I think we need to have an honest conversation. We have had several honest conversations, not like this one. I walked into the living room. I did not sit. I stood near Robert's chair, close enough to feel the familiar proximity of it, the way it had always grounded me, and I looked at her. She opened the folder. Inside were documents, not legal documents as I had half expected. Something else, papers with highlighted passages, printed articles, and my breath caught what appeared to be financial statements. My financial statements, where did you get those? My voice was very controlled. Nathan had access to some accounts, joint accounts from when you helped us out a few years ago. You went through my financial records. I was trying to understand the full picture. You went through my financial records, Claire, without asking me. Without my permission. You took documents that belonged to me. I needed to understand what was at stake. I raised one hand. Flat palm, the way you stop someone walking into traffic. Stop right there. I want you to listen to what you just said. You needed to understand what was at stake. My finances are at stake for you. My house is at stake for you. My life, the life I have built across 43 years in this house, is a set of stakes you are calculating. Is that right? Is that actually where we are? She held my gaze. And in that moment, the softness that she usually kept on the surface, the warmth, the smiles, The roses from the farmer's market, it slipped. Just for a moment, just enough. Nathan is my husband. What affects him affects me. You have assets that could change our situation dramatically, and you are refusing to give them to you, to share them with family. Claire, I picked up the folder from my coffee table, closed it, held it in my hands. I'm going to keep this, because these are my documents and they should not exist in your possession. And then I'm going to ask you to leave. And then I'm going to call Gerald Marsh and tell him what just happened. And then, Claire, whatever happens next between you and Nathan is between you and Nathan. But I need you to hear me now, very clearly. For the last time, there is nothing in this house. Not one stick of furniture. Not 1 square foot of this land. Not one piece of paper with my name on it. That belongs to you. Not now, not ever, and I need you to leave. She stood there. For 5 full seconds, she stood there, and I watched her realize, finally and completely, that I meant it. She took the folder. I let her take it back, because I was already on the phone with Gerald in my mind, and she walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned. You're going to be alone, Margaret. You know that? Nathan and I will figure out our problems, and you are going to be in this house completely alone, and someday you're going to wish you'd. Goodbye, Claire. She left. I closed the door. I stood in my living room with my hand flat against the closed door, and I breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3. Then I went to the kitchen. I called Gerald Marsh. I told him about the financial documents. I heard him exhale on the other end, a precise, controlled exhale that on a less measured man would have been an expletive. She had access through a joint account Nathan holds. Apparently, we need to close that account. Today, if possible. And Margaret, this is now a different kind of situation. Accessing your financial records without authorization. I know. I want to send a formal letter today. To her, to Farrell's office if she's still retained, and I want to document everything. Every conversation, every visit, everything you can recall with dates. I've been keeping notes. A pause. Of course you have. I'll send you everything this evening, Margaret. A pause. You're doing everything right. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table. The house was very quiet, and for the first time in weeks the quiet felt like mine again. Not threatening, not lonely, mine. Because there is a specific kind of quiet that comes after you have held your ground so many times that the ground has finally stopped shaking under you. When you have said no enough times, in enough ways, with enough documentation behind you, that the pressure begins to redirect itself somewhere else. I did not know yet how the rest of this would unfold. I did not know what Nathan would do, or what Claire would do, or whether Diane Farrell's office had been called or not. What I knew was this: I was still in my house, my will was airtight. My attorney was prepared, my capacity was documented. My financial accounts were being secured, and I was not afraid. That night I made myself dinner: roasted chicken, green beans, a glass of red wine that Robert would have called extravagant for a Tuesday, and I would have called completely necessary. I ate at my kitchen table. I looked out the window at the bare November garden. I thought about what Claire had said at the door. You're going to be alone, Margaret. I turned that sentence over carefully in my mind, the way you turn a stone to see if anything is living underneath it. And here is what I found. There is alone and there is alone. There is the alone that is imposed on you, stripped of people, stripped of warmth, emptied out against your will. And there is the alone that you have chosen, that you have earned. That means this space belongs to me and everything in it exists on my terms. That second kind of alone is not loneliness, it is sovereignty. Claire had meant to frighten me with the word. Instead, she had reminded me of something I knew. I am fine. I have always been fine. This house, these walls, this garden, this kitchen, this chair where Robert used to sit, they are not a consolation prize for a woman who ended up alone. They are the evidence of a life fully lived by a person who is still very much living it. No one was going to take that from me, and if they kept trying, they were going to discover exactly how much fight was left in a 69-year-old widow from Asheville, North Carolina. Quite a lot, as it turned out, quite a lot. Gerald's letter went out the next morning. I know this because he called me at 8:45 to confirm it had been sent, certified mail, to Claire's address in Charlotte and to Diane Farrell's office. He read me the key paragraph over the phone, the one that stated clearly, in the language attorneys use when they want there to be absolutely no ambiguity, that Margaret Ann Collins was legally represented, that her estate was fully documented and secured, that any further attempts to access her financial records, initiate conservatorship proceedings, or contact her directly regarding her property would be met with immediate legal response. I listened to every word, then I said, "Thank you, Gerald. Don't thank me yet. Let's see how they respond. How long? If Farrell is smart, and she probably is, she'll advise her client to step back. The conservatorship angle has no legs. You're healthy, you're capable, your finances are in order. Any judge worth his robe would dismiss it in the first hearing, a pause. But Margaret, smart people do stupid things when they're desperate. Don't let your guard down, I told him I wouldn't. I meant it. The response came faster than either of us expected. Not from Farrell's office, not from Claire, from Nathan. He called me that same evening, Friday, just after 6. I was in the kitchen. I heard something in his voice the moment he spoke my name, a tightness, a strain, the specific register of a man who has just come through something and is still breathing hard on the other side of it. Mom Farrell's office called Claire's this afternoon, right after Gerald's letter arrived, and she ended it. The arrangement. Claire called me from the car. She was crying. She said Gerald's letter was aggressive and threatening, and that you were trying to destroy our family. I kept my voice even. I was trying to protect my home. I know that. I told her that. He exhaled. She didn't take it well. How are you? A long pause. The kind that means the answer is complicated, and the person isn't sure yet how much of the complication they want to hand you. I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know. I feel like I've been watching something happen for months and telling myself it wasn't what it was. And now it's just very clear what it was. Yes, I said simply, it is. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Nathan, you saw it when it mattered. You told her to stop. You came to me. I chose my next words carefully because I meant them, and because they were true, and because some truths need to be said plainly. That is not nothing. He was quiet for a moment. She wants to come talk to you. Every muscle in my body went very still. Claire does. Yes, she says she wants to apologize. She says she went too far and she knows it and she wants to tell you herself. Another pause. Mom, I don't know if it's genuine. I want to believe it is. But I've been wrong about things lately, so I don't trust my own read right now. That was the most honest thing Nathan had said to me in months. Maybe years. Tell her she can come Sunday afternoon, I said. 2 o'clock, are you sure? I'm sure I was not sure. But I had learned in 43 years in this house that there is a difference between being sure and being ready. I was not sure what Claire would bring with her Sunday. I was not sure what was genuine in her and what was strategy. But I was ready. I had always been ready. It was the one thing I had learned in the year after Robert died, that readiness is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to show up anyway. Sunday came. I was ready at 1:30, dressed, coffee made, the good mugs out. Patrice had called in the morning to check on me, and I told her Claire was coming, and she said, in the voice she uses when she is trying not to say something alarming, "You call me the second she leaves." I will. I mean it, Mag, the second. I know you do. I sat in my living room and waited. 2 o'clock came. 2:15, 2:30. At 2:47 my phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Running late, so sorry, be there by 3. I looked at the text for a moment, then I put the phone down and picked up my book. Because I had learned something about Claire over the past weeks. She was most confident when you were waiting for her. When you had arranged yourself around her schedule. When your attention was already on the door before she knocked. I was not going to give her that. She knocked at 3:10. I finished the paragraph I was reading, then I put the book down unhurried and went to the door. She was standing on my porch alone. No coat this time, just a sweater. Dark blue. Her arms crossed slightly against the November chill, her face stripped of the usual performance. No careful smile, no flowers. Just Claire, without the armor she usually wore. And she looked, standing there in the cold, younger than I had ever seen her look. Something in me noticed that and felt it, not enough to lower my guard, but enough to feel it. Come in, I said. We went to the living room. She sat on the sofa. I sat across from her in my chair. The same positions we had been in weeks ago when she'd come with roses and apologies and something calculating hiding underneath both. But this time felt different. I could not have explained why exactly. Something in the quality of her stillness. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked up at me. I don't know how to start this, she said. Start at the beginning, I said. That's what I always tell the children at the library. Just start at the beginning. She almost smiled. Almost. I told myself a story, she said. I told myself that you were lonely and that we were helping you, and that it was practical and logical, and that you just needed time to see it our way. I told myself that story for months. I repeated it until I believed it. She paused. And then Gerald Marsh's letter arrived, and I sat in my car in the parking garage and I read it, and I realized that the story I had been telling myself was not the real story. The real story was that I wanted your house, and I had been dressing that up in language about family and practicality and your well-being until I couldn't see for what it actually was. The room was very quiet. What was it, I asked, not to be unkind, because I wanted to hear her say it. She met my eyes. It was taking something that wasn't mine. I held her gaze. Yes, I said, it was. She looked back down at her hands. I involved a lawyer. I looked at your financial records without permission. I came to your house with moving boxes without asking you." She shook her head slightly. "I don't have an excuse for any of that. I have reasons things that were happening, pressures I was under, fears I had, but those aren't excuses." "I know the difference. So do I said. "I am sorry, Margaret." She said it straight. No decoration, no performance. Just the sentence given directly. "I am genuinely sorry. Not because Gerald sent a letter and the legal thing is over. Because what I did was wrong, and you deserved better than what I gave you." I looked at this woman, my son's wife. The woman who had stood in my hallway with moving boxes, who had touched my mantle like she was measuring for new curtains, who had gone to a law firm and asked how to take control of what belonged to me. I thought about what it cost to say what she had just said. Not in terms of pride, although it costs pride, but in terms of actually seeing yourself clearly enough to say it. "That is harder than most people know. I accept your apology," I said. She looked up. "That doesn't mean everything is repaired," I continued. "What was broken between us will take time, but I accept that you mean what you said. And I want you to know something, Claire." I leaned forward slightly. "I do not need you to have been a villain for me to have been right. You can be a person who made terrible choices under pressure and still have made terrible choices. Both things are true, and going forward, if you and Nathan work things out, I need you to remember this moment. Not the shame of it, the clarity of it, the moment you saw yourself without the story." Her eyes were bright. She nodded once, very small. "But real." "Okay," she said. We sat for another few minutes. Not warm exactly, but honest, and honest in that moment was worth more than warm. She left at 4. I called Patrice. She apologized, I said. "Was it real?" Mostly is something." "It is," I agreed. I hung up and sat in my chair for a long time, and I thought that perhaps the worst of it was over. That perhaps we had come through the hardest part, and what lay ahead was the slow, unglamorous, necessary work of rebuilding. I was wrong. Not about Claire. Her apology held. In the weeks that followed, she receded from the situation in a way that felt genuine, not dramatic withdrawal, not punishment. Just a quiet stepping back that said, "I understand that I need to earn this differently now." I was wrong about the worst being over because the worst had not yet arrived. It arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Claire's Sunday visit, in the form of a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer it. I was in the middle of making soup, the good chicken soup I make every November, the one that takes all day and fills the house with a smell that has always felt to me like the physical definition of comfort. My hands were in the middle of something. I almost let it ring. I answered it. "Is this Margaret Collins?" A woman's voice. Older, careful. Something underneath the caution that I could not immediately identify. "It is. Who is this?" "My name is Susan. Susan Hartwell. I'm Claire's mother." I set down what I was holding. In 8 years of Nathan and Claire's marriage, I had met Susan Hartwell exactly 3 times. Once at the wedding, once at Thanksgiving 4 years ago, once briefly at a birthday party for one of the grandchildren, where we had spoken for perhaps 10 minutes about nothing consequential. She was a small, neat woman with Claire's eyes, and a manner that always seemed to me to be holding something back, some opinion or feeling kept carefully below the surface, the way people keep things when they have learned that expressing them causes problems. "Susan," I said, "this is a surprise. I know, I'm sorry to call out of nowhere. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have called about sooner, and I kept finding reasons not to, and I finally decided that's a form of cowardice I can't keep affording." Something in my chest went very still. "Go ahead," I said. She took a breath. "Margaret, Claire called me in September. Right around when things with you were starting. She called me and she told me that you had offered to have me come live with you. In your home, that you had extended the invitation, and that you were excited about it, and that it was going to be wonderful for all of us." Soup on the stove was simmering. I could hear it. I could hear it very clearly, because the rest of the room had gone absolutely silent. "Susan," I said, "I never made that offer." A long pause. "I know that now." Her voice was thin. "I know that now, Margaret. But I didn't know it then. I believed her. She's my daughter. She told me you invited me and I gave up my apartment." The room tilted. Not literally, but something shifted in my understanding, some tectonic thing rearranging itself underneath everything I had known about this situation. Because I had been thinking about Claire's plan as a plan about the house, about money, about Claire and Nathan, and their Charlotte apartment and their financial problems. I had not understood until this moment that Susan was part of it. That her mother, a 71-year-old woman who had lived in her apartment in Greensboro for 11 years, had been told a lie and had reorganized her entire life around that lie. "When did you give up the apartment?" I asked. My voice was very steady. "I concentrated on keeping it that way. October. She told me the timing worked out perfectly with what she called the transition. I gave my notice in October. I've been staying in a short-term rental since November 1st because Claire said the move-in was going to happen any week. She kept saying any week, and I kept packing more boxes, and then 2 weeks ago she called me and said there'd been complications. And she didn't explain, and I asked Nathan, and he said he couldn't talk about it right now, and something felt wrong, so I started asking questions. And I found out, Margaret. I found out that you never offered anything. That none of this was real. I sat down. I had been standing at the stove, and I sat down on the kitchen floor, right there, with the phone against my ear and the soup still simmering above me. Because what Susan was describing was not just a scheme to take my house. It was bigger than that. Claire had not just tried to move herself into my home. She had arranged her own mother as part of the plan, told Susan a story to get her to give up her apartment, probably knowing that once Susan was displaced, the pressure on me would be unbearable. A 71-year-old woman with nowhere to go, her own mother, standing at my door with nowhere else to turn. The trap was elegant in the way that terrible things can be elegant. And it had almost worked, Susan. I made myself breathe. In, out, where are you right now, the short-term rental? It's fine, Margaret, please don't. How long is the rental paid through? A pause. End of this month. 4 days. I'm going to give you a phone number, I said. Her name is Patricia Downing. Most people call her Patrice. She works with a senior resource network here in Asheville. I want you to call her today, not tomorrow, today. Tell her I sent you, and tell her she will help you find something. Something good, something that is actually yours. Silence on the line. Then Susan said, very quietly, I am so sorry, Margaret. For what my daughter tried to do to you, I am so sorry. And something cracked in me. Not broke, cracked. The way good wood cracks under pressure, along a grain, in a way that changes the shape of it but doesn't destroy it. You are not responsible for what Claire did, I said. You are as much a victim of this as I am, more in some ways. I still have my home. You gave up yours. She was crying quietly on the other end of the line. I stayed on the phone with her for 20 minutes. I got the name of her short-term rental. I got her contact information. I called Patrice the moment I hung up, standing in my kitchen with the soup gone cold on the stove, and I told Patrice the whole thing in 4 minutes flat. Patrice was quiet for a moment, then she said, the mother. Yes, she used her own mother. Yes, Margaret. Patrice's voice had dropped to something low and very serious. You know what this means about how far she was willing to go. I know. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't someone who got desperate and made a bad call. She told her mother in September. She got her mother to give up her apartment in October. She was planning this for months while smiling at your kitchen table. I know, Patrice. Are you okay? I thought about that honestly before I answered. I will be, I said. I need to call Nathan, Mag. Be careful how you do this. I know how he's going to react. That's why I need to call him now, before he finds out some other way. I called Nathan. He picked up immediately. Mom, what's wrong? Nothing is wrong with me. I need you to listen without interrupting me. Can you do that? Yes. Susan Hartwell called me this afternoon. Silence, your mother-in-law, I said, in case the name hadn't registered. Claire's mother. She called me to tell me that Claire told her, in September, that I had extended an invitation for her to come live in my home. That the move was happening any week. She gave up her apartment in October based on that. She has been in a short-term rental for 3 weeks. It runs out in 4 days. The silence on the line had a specific quality that I can only describe as a man trying to remain standing when the ground underneath him has given way. Nathan, are you there? I'm here. Did you know about Zit's part? About Susan? No, his voice was flat, completely flat. No, Mom. I did not know about Susan K. He stopped. She told her mother that you invited her, her own mother. Yes, I heard him breathing, unsteady, the kind of breathing that is very close to something breaking open. Nathan, Susan is okay. I have called Patrice and Susan is going to be helped. That is handled. What I need you to do right now is to decide how you are going to respond to your wife about this. Not for my benefit, for yours, because this is information about who Claire is, and you deserve to have that information clearly. Mom, his voice cracked on the word. I don't know what to do with this. You don't have to know tonight. But Nathan, this conversation with your wife needs to happen. And it needs to happen honestly. No managing the situation. No keeping the peace, honestly. Yeah, a long exhale. Yeah, okay, call me after, whatever time it is. Okay, we hung up. I stood in my kitchen. The soup had gone completely cold. I reheated it slowly, standing at the stove, watching the surface begin to move again. Little currents, little eddies of heat working through something that had been still. I thought about Susan Hartwell, packing boxes in her Greensboro apartment in October. Folding her things, labeling the boxes, telling her friends she was making a big change. Probably excited. At first, probably nervous the way people get when change is coming. Moving at 71 years old, away from the apartment where she'd spent 11 years, because her daughter told her a grandmother's story about being welcomed into a family and belonging somewhere warm. And the entire thing was a lie. I ate my soup standing at the counter. I was not going to let this take my appetite. I was not going to let any of this take one more thing from me than it already had. Nathan called at 11:17 that night. I was awake. I knew he would call eventually, and I had not let myself sleep. Because some conversations you need to be fully conscious for, and this was one of them. "How did it go?" I asked. He gave a short sound, not a laugh. "Something more broken than that. She denied it first," said Susan, misunderstood. Said she never told her mother there was a firm plan, just that it was a possibility she was exploring. Said Susan had a tendency to hear what she wanted to hear. And then I told her I had talked to Susan directly. That I had called Susan while Claire and I were on the phone and put her on speaker. He paused. That was when the story changed. What was the new story? That she did it for everyone. That she was trying to solve multiple problems at once. That Susan needed somewhere to go, and we needed somewhere to go, and you had more space than you needed, and she was trying to make it work for everyone, and she got ahead of herself. I closed my eyes briefly, and what did you say? I said that getting ahead of herself doesn't involve telling your mother a lie that makes her give up her home. A pause. I said a lot of things, Mom. I won't repeat all of them. But I said what needed to be said. Are you okay? A long silence. I don't think so. Not tonight. But I think I'm finally seeing something clearly that I've been refusing to see for a long time. And even if that's painful, it's better than not seeing it. Yes, I said. It is, Mom. Can I come this weekend? Just can I come, and can we not talk about any of this, and can you make that chicken soup? Something warm moved through my chest. The soup is already made, I said. It's in the refrigerator. Come Saturday. Okay. Nathan, yeah, you did the right thing tonight. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet and real and stripped of everything except what it actually was, my son, tired and hurting and trying. Thanks, Mom. We hung up. I went to bed, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Saturday arrived, and so did Nathan, just after noon, in the same wrinkled coat with the same tired eyes, but with something different in the set of his shoulders. Something that had been held tensely for months was beginning very slowly to release. We ate soup at my kitchen table. We talked about safe things, his work, my library volunteering, the grandchildren, the garden's plans for spring. We did not talk about Claire. We did not talk about lawyers or financial records or Susan Hartwell's boxes. And then, over the second bowl, Nathan put his spoons down and looked at me. I need to tell you something else. I waited. There's something I found out this week. Something about the paperwork Claire brought to you. The ownership transfer documents. I looked at him steadily. What about them? She didn't have those drafted by Farrell. I checked Farrell's firm does conservatorship work, family law, estates. The documents Claire brought to you, I went back through her email. Mom, she found a template online. It wasn't even a real attorney-drafted transfer. It was a document she pulled off a legal template site and filled in herself. I let that sit. I had held those documents in my hands. I had read them. I had felt the cold, sinking weight of seeing my own name on paperwork that transferred ownership of my home to my son. And the entire thing had been constructed from a template she'd downloaded from a website. She presented them to you as though they were legal and official, Nathan said. She knew they weren't. She was counting on you not knowing the difference. The audacity of it was almost something I needed to sit with separately. Not the manipulation, I had processed the manipulation, but the specific calculation of it. The assessment that Margaret Collins, 69, widow, would look at a stack of official-looking paper and not know enough to question it. Nathan, I said, your mother called Gerald Marsh the same day your wife put that folder on my table. He looked at me for a moment. Then something happened to his face, a combination of things I don't have a single word for. Pride, maybe, and shame, and something that looked underneath both of those like relief. Of course you did, of course I did. We looked at each other across my kitchen table. And in that look was 41 years of history, the gap-toothed 7-year-old and the woman who had carried him, the teenager who had argued with me about curfews, the young man who had brought Claire home to Sunday dinner, the adult who had sat on my sofa and looked at his shoes while his wife divided up my home. And now this version of my son, sitting at my table eating my soup, finally looking at me the way he used to before something got in between us. I owe you more than a bowl of soup, he said. You owe me nothing, I said. But I will take the company. We stayed at the table for 3 hours. When he left, he hugged me at the door, a real hug, the kind that lasts a second longer than polite, the kind that means something. He smelled like cedar and something faintly sweet, the same aftershave as always, and I held on for just a moment and thought of him at 22, and him at 7 and all the years in between, and I was grateful that we were still standing. He drove away down Ridgeline Road. I closed the front door. And that was when my phone rang. Gerald Marsh. On a Saturday afternoon, which Gerald Marsh never did. I answered immediately. Gerald, Margaret, something has come to my attention, and I need to tell you before you hear it another way. His voice had that quality, the measured, careful quality that on a less restrained man would simply be urgency. I received a call today from an attorney in Greensboro. He represents a woman named Susan Hartwell. I held the phone tighter. Susan retained an attorney. It appears that after your call this week, she decided to explore her options. She believes she has a potential case against Claire for misrepresentation. For the loss of her apartment, I was quiet for a moment. Is she right? I asked. Does she have a case, potentially? It depends on documentation, what she can show in terms of the communications between her and Claire, whether she has texts or emails that demonstrate what she was told and what she relied on to her detriment. But Margaret, the reason I'm calling you is this. If Susan pursues legal action, Claire's attorney is almost certainly going to attempt to involve you in some way, to claim that the situation was more ambiguous than it was. To muddy the water. They will not find muddy water, I said. They will find Gerald Marsh. A beat, yes, he said. They will. I could hear the closest thing Gerald Marsh ever produced to satisfaction in his voice. I wanted you to know it's possible, so you're not caught off guard. Gerald, has anything about this situation caught me off guard? This time I was almost certain I heard him laugh. Very quietly, but no, he said, it has not. We hung up. I put my phone on the kitchen counter. I looked around my kitchen, at the good mugs still on the table from Nathan's visit. At the pot on the stove clean now where the soup had been. At the crack in the tile by the stove that Robert said gave the house character. At all of it, still mine, every inch, still mine. I thought about Susan Hartwell sitting in her short-term rental, having made a call to Anton. Having decided at 71 years old that she was not going to simply absorb what had been done to her, that she was going to stand in her own truth and let it speak. Good for her, I thought. Good for her, and I thought about what was still ahead. Because I knew, with the certainty of a woman who has been paying attention, that we were not at the end of this story. Claire had not played every card. The situation with Susan had introduced new pressure into a system that was already under strain. Nathan and Claire's marriage was fracturing visibly. And whatever came next was going to require me to be exactly what I had been all along. Present, clear, unafraid. I went to bed that Saturday night and I lay in the dark and I listened to my house. The settling sounds it makes at night, the small cracks and sighs of old wood doing what old wood does. The sound of the wind in the bare trees outside. The specific nighttime quality of silence in a house that has been lived in for 43 years, that carries within its walls the accumulated weight of every meal and argument and celebration and grief and ordinary Tuesday morning that has happened inside it. I listened, and the house held me the way it always had. The way it always would. I was still here, and I was not done. Sunday morning arrived quietly. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and read for an hour before I let myself think about any of it. That is a discipline I developed in the year after Robert died, the practice of giving myself 1 hour in the morning that belongs only to me before the weight of whatever is happening presses in. 1 hour of coffee and a book and nothing else. Robert used to say I was the most stubborn reader he'd ever met because I could be in the middle of a hurricane and still finish my chapter. He wasn't wrong. At 8 o'clock I put the book down and let myself think. Gerald had told me on Saturday that Susan might pursue legal action. That Claire's attorney might try to involve me, that the situation was not, as I had briefly allowed myself to hope, finished. I sat with that. I turned it over. I thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean and what my role in it was and wasn't. And then the phone rang. It was Susan, not her attorney. Susan herself, early on a Sunday morning. And I could hear in the first 3 words, Margaret, I'm sorry that something had happened. Don't apologize, I said. Tell me what's going on. Claire called me last night, late after midnight, a pause. She wasn't angry, which was the part that surprised me. She sounded tired. She said she needed me to understand something. She said that what she told me about your invitation wasn't exactly a lie. It was more like she said she had been confident it would all work out, and she got ahead of herself, and she never meant for me to actually give up my apartment based on something that wasn't finalized yet. I held the phone and waited, and then she asked me not to pursue anything legally. She said if I did, it would destroy her marriage and break up the family, and that the person who would really get hurt was Nathan. The manipulation was so clean I almost had to admire the architecture of it. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her I needed to think about it. Susan's voice was thin but steady. Margaret, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if you think it's not what I want to hear. Go ahead. Do you think I should pursue it, legally? I thought carefully before I answered, because this was not my decision to make. It was Susan's, and whatever I said next would carry weight with her whether I wanted it to or not. I think, I said slowly, that you lost your apartment because someone told you something that wasn't true. I think that is real harm and you have every right to address it. I also think that only you can decide whether the cost of a legal process is worth what it might recover. Not just financially, emotionally. A pause. What I can tell you is this: you do not owe anyone your silence. Not Claire, not the idea of family peace, not anyone. Susan was quiet for a long moment. She's my daughter, she said finally. Yes, and I love her. Even after this, I love her. Which makes me angrier if I'm honest, because she knew I loved her and she used it. Yes, I said, she did. I haven't decided yet, but I wanted to hear your voice. Is that strange? No, I said, it isn't strange at all. We talked for another 20 minutes, not about legal strategy or Claire or apartments. Just talked about Asheville, about how I'd discovered the senior community through Patrice, about the reading program at the library. Human things, the kind of conversation that reminds you that other people are real, not just forces acting on your life. When we hung up, I sat with the particular stillness of someone who has just been trusted with something heavy. I called Patrice. She's wavering, I said, on the legal thing. Claire called her last night, played the Nathan card. Patrice made a sound. I recognized the sound she makes when something doesn't surprise her but still offends her. Using Nathan as a shield. Yes, is Susan going to back down? I don't know, she loves Claire, that's real. It's also exactly what Claire counted on. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said. This one is Susan's. I told her what I thought, and I'm going to let her decide. Mag, Patrice's voice shifted. You know this isn't over regardless of what Susan decides. I know. Claire is still married to Nathan. You're still going to have to figure out what that means for the long term. For Christmas, for the grandchildren, for all of it. I know that too. Are you okay? I thought about the question honestly. I had been thinking about it honestly for weeks now, every time someone asked it, trying not to give the reflexive answer, the fine. I'm fine. Don't worry about me answer that women of my generation learned to give before we learned much else. I'm managing, I said, which is different from okay but better than not. That's honest, I'm trying to be. The week that followed was the quietest week since October. No phone calls from Gerald, no visits from Claire. Nathan texted twice short, checking in texts, the kind that said I'm here without demanding anything back. I answered both. I went to the library on Wednesday. I worked in the garden on Thursday, cutting back the last of the dead growth, preparing beds for spring. I had dinner with Patrice on Friday at the Italian place on Lexington that we had been going to since 1994, where the owner still called us by our first names and brought bread before we ordered. It felt that week almost like ordinary life. I should have known better. The call came the following Monday just after 10 in the morning. It was Nathan, not his checking-in voice, something different. Strained in a new way, not the exhausted strain I had been hearing for months, but something sharper. Something that had an edge. Mom, are you home? Yes. What's wrong? I'm coming over. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't. If Claire calls you, don't answer. My stomach tightened. Nathan, tell me what's happening. A pause. I heard a car door. An engine starting. I'll tell you when I get there. I need you to be home and I need you to not answer if she calls. I'm home. He hung up. I put the phone on the counter. I stood in my kitchen and I breathed one breath, 2, 3. I thought about calling Gerald and decided to wait until I knew what I was dealing with. I made a fresh pot of coffee because my hands needed something to do and because Nathan sounded like a man who was going to need coffee when he arrived. He was at my door in 38 minutes. He came inside and he sat at the kitchen table and he put both hands flat on the surface and he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on my son's face before. Not grief, not guilt, something colder and more resolute. The expression of someone who has made a decision that cost them everything and is still standing after it. I asked Claire to leave this morning. The kitchen was very still. I asked her to pack what she needed for a while and go stay with a friend. She's gone. I sat down across from him. Nathan. Let me finish. I need to tell you all of it, and then you can say whatever you need to say. He took a breath. I found something Saturday night after I left here. I was going through some things. I needed a document from the filing cabinet, something for work, and I found a folder. He reached into his jacket and put a folder on my kitchen table. I looked at it, manila folder, nothing written on the tab. So what's inside? Notes, in Claire's handwriting, about the house. About you. He pushed the folder toward me. About the plan. I opened it. Inside was a yellow legal pad folded in quarters. Claire's handwriting, I knew it from birthday cards and grocery lists left on the counter during holiday visits. Neat, slightly slanted, the letters pressed firmly into the page. I read. It took me several minutes because I read slowly and carefully, the way you read something when you need to be certain of what you are actually seeing. When I finished, I closed the folder and placed my hands flat on top of it and sat very still. The notes were dated. They began in August when Nathan and Claire had not yet come to see me, when I had not yet heard a word about any of this. They outlined in Claire's precise handwriting a sequence. First, the visit to establish interest, then the practical conversation about shared living. Then, and this was the part that stopped my breath, a note that said, if direct approach fails, explore legal options. Capacity assessment. Conservatorship timeline, 6 to 8 months. She had researched the timeline. She had known, before she ever walked through my front door with her coffee cup and her compliments about my garden, that if I said no, she had a legal strategy prepared. This was not impulsive. This was not someone who got carried away or got ahead of herself. This was planned, methodical, in writing with dates. There was a note about Susan, August 14th. Tell Mom it's confirmed. Get her to give notice in October, August 14th. She told her mother the invitation was confirmed before she had even made the visit. Before I had been asked anything, before the moving boxes, before the roses, before any conversation with me at all. She told her mother the house was settled on August 14th. I had said no for the first time in October. Susan Hartwell had given up her apartment, believing a story that Claire knew was a lie before the story even began. Nathan, I said. My voice was very careful. How long have you had this? Since Saturday night. I found it Saturday after I left here. I sat with it until Monday morning because I needed to be sure of what I was doing before I did it. He met my eyes. I asked her this morning if there was anything she wanted to tell me. I gave her a chance. She told me she'd been under a lot of stress, and sometimes she wrote things down to process her feelings, and I should know that none of it reflected her actual intentions. I looked at the folder under my hands, and then I put the folder on the table. A beat. What did she say? She said I was violating her privacy by going through her things. The sound I made was not a laugh exactly. It was something that emerged from a place too tired for anger and too honest for silence. I told her, Nathan said, that she went through your financial records. I told her she lied to her own mother. I told her she had been planning this since August. And then I asked her to leave. He looked at his hands on the table. She told me I was choosing you over her. And what did you say? He looked up. I told her I was choosing reality over a story. That those weren't the same thing as choosing between people. He paused. And then I told her that, if she wanted to talk about any of it, really talk, not manage the situation, I would listen. But that I needed her out of the house while I figured out what I actually thought about everything. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. He turned his hand over and held on. We sat like that for a while, the coffee going warm between us, the November light coming through my kitchen window at its particular angle, the house settling around us with its familiar small sounds. I'm proud of you, I said. He shook his head slightly. Don't be. I should have seen this months ago. Seeing it now took courage too. Mom, he looked at me steadily. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Always, when you said all those weeks ago that I was going to have to decide where I stood, that I was standing in the middle of a road and a car was coming, did you know then that it was this bad? I thought about the honest answer. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know the full shape of it until the notes in that folder. But I knew that what was happening wasn't something that would resolve on its own. Yes, I knew it was serious. Why didn't you tell me everything you knew? Because some things a person has to arrive at themselves. If I had handed you the conclusion, you wouldn't have owned it. You would have been following my map instead of reading your own. And Nathan, you needed to read your own map. For your sake. Not mine. He was quiet for a long time. That's a very patient way to love someone, he said finally. It's the only way I know how. We drank our coffee. After a while he said, what do I do now? Today, nothing dramatic. You go home to your house, you let the space be quiet. You eat something decent and you sleep. And after that you figure out what you want your life to look like. Not what Claire wants, not what I want, what you want. And I'll be here while you figure it out. He nodded. He left just after noon. I stood at my window and watched his car go and felt the complex weight of loving a child the way it never simplifies, never becomes less costly, never stops being the most demanding and most essential thing you do. I picked up the phone and called Gerald. Nathan found documentation. Notes in Claire's handwriting, dated from August, outlining the plan in detail, including the conservatorship timeline and the instructions regarding Susan. A pause. Nathan has the original. He brought it to me. It's sitting on my kitchen table. I need a copy. Today if possible. Another pause. And then, Margaret, this changes things considerably. I know, if Susan is still considering legal action, this documentation substantially strengthens her case. If Claire's attorney attempts to involve you in any way going forward, this is your answer. He paused. And Margaret, I want to say something to you that I don't often say to clients. I waited. You handled this exactly right, every step. From the moment you walked into my office in November to right now. You didn't panic. You didn't retaliate. You documented, you protected, and you let the truth find its own way to the surface. That is not common. Most people in your situation would have made at least one move that cost them. You didn't. I held the phone and felt something move through me. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter. The satisfaction of knowing that the version of yourself you have been trying to be is the version you actually were when it counted. I had good help, I said. You did the work, Gerald said. I just held the door. I drove to his office that afternoon and dropped off the folder. When I got home, there was a voicemail on my landline. I still have a landline, Robert insisted on it, and I have kept it the way I keep the crack in the kitchen tile, because some things are worth keeping, not because they're practical, but because they're his. The voicemail was from Claire. Her voice was different from any version of it I had heard before. Not the confident voice, not the apologetic voice, not the calculating voice, something stripped and undefended, the voice of someone standing in a room with no furniture left to hide behind. Margaret, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I understand that. I wanted to say that Nathan showed me the folder. He told me he brought it to you, and I know there's nothing I can say right now that changes any of what happened. But I want you to know that the person who wrote those notes is not, I don't want to be that person. I don't know when I became that person. I think I've been so afraid for so long about money and stability and the future that I convinced myself the ends justified. I convinced myself of a lot of things that weren't true. A long pause. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not calling to ask for that. I'm just calling because I think you deserve to hear me say it out loud. What I did was wrong, not complicated, not nuanced. Wrong, the message ended. I stood at the phone for a while. I did not call her back. Not that day. There was a version of me that wanted to the version that is always reaching for resolution, for the closed loop, for the moment where everything is said that needs to be said, and the accounts are balanced. But I have learned in 69 years that some resolutions need to arrive in their own time. Forcing them too soon produces something that looks like closure but isn't. It's just two people agreeing to stop feeling uncomfortable. Real closure costs more than that, and it takes longer. What I did instead was call Susan. I need to tell you something, I said when she answered. And I want to tell you because you deserve to have the complete picture. I told her about the folder. I told her about the August notes. I told her the date August 14th and what it meant. That the story about a confirmed invitation had been constructed before any conversation with me had taken place. That Claire had known from the beginning that the invitation wasn't real, because the invitation had never existed. Susan's was silent for a very long time. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and very controlled, the voice of someone who has just had the last piece of something click into place and is sitting with the full weight of the picture. She planned it from August, she said. Yes, she told me it was confirmed in August. Yes, which means she looked at me in August and decided that I was a useful piece of her plan. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, Margaret. Something had shifted in Susan's voice. Something that had been wavering was no longer wavering. I've made my decision. I'm going forward with the legal action. Okay, I said. I want you to know that this isn't about money. My attorney says the damages are modest moving costs, some rent differential, incidentals. It isn't about the money. I know, I said. It's about the fact that she looked at me and decided I was a tool. That's the part I can't let go unanswered. I understand that completely, I said. Will you, if they need a statement from you, about your side of things, would you be willing? I said without hesitation, yes, I would. We said goodbye. I put the phone down. I sat in my kitchen in the particular quiet of a late November afternoon, the light going early the way it does in November, the day closing down around you faster than you expect. I thought about August 14th. I thought about Claire on that date wherever she was, whatever she was doing, writing the words, "Tell Mom it's confirmed," in her neat, pressed handwriting on a yellow legal pad, already setting in motion, something that would spend the next 4 months consuming her marriage, her relationship with her own mother, and her place in my life. I thought about how long she had been afraid, because that part, at least, I believed. The fear was real, the desperation was real, the sense of drowning and grabbing for anything solid was real. The cruelty of it was that fear does not excuse what fear makes you do. You can understand the wound and still name the damage. Both things are true. The following Thursday, Gerald called. Farrell's office reached out to me this morning, unsolicited, a pause. Claire has let Farrell go, no longer retained, I exhaled. And Susan's attorney contacted me as well. The action is proceeding. Claire has been formally notified, another pause. I expect we'll receive some kind of communication from Claire or a new attorney in the next week or two, possibly requesting that you provide context for the situation. I want you to be prepared for that. I'm prepared. Margaret, do you want a statement drafted? Something comprehensive in writing that documents your experience of this situation from October through today. Yes, I said. I think that would be wise. I'll draft something and send it to you by end of week. You can revise as needed. It should be in your voice, not mine. Gerald, one more thing. Yes, the folder, the notes. Can those be used in Susan's case? Nathan would need to make them available voluntarily. No one can compel him at this stage, but if he's willing, I'll ask him. I called Nathan that evening. I need to ask you something, I said. Okay, Susan is proceeding legally. Her attorney may need the folder, the notes as documentation. I want to know if you're willing to make them available. A long pause. The longest pause Nathan had given me in any of these conversations, and there had been many. I heard him breathing. I heard him thinking, yes, he said finally. Are you sure? I'm sure. His voice was quiet but resolved. Mom, what she did to her own mother, what she did to you, it shouldn't just disappear because it's uncomfortable. If those notes help Susan, then they should help Susan. Okay, I said. How does this affect her legally? For her, I was quiet for a moment. That's between her and her attorney. But Nathan, it's evidence of intent, of planning. It matters, he exhaled. I know. Are you okay with that? No, he said honestly, but I'm okay with what's right. Those aren't always the same thing. I held the phone and felt the weight of what my son had just said. That sentence, the distance between what's okay and what's right. The decision to choose the right even when it cost him. That was not nothing. That was not a small thing. That was Nathan, my son, becoming something. I love you, I said. Love you too, Mom. We hung up. That weekend, Nathan came back to Ridgeline Road. He brought groceries this time. He had called ahead, asked what I needed, shown up with 2 bags of things without being asked twice. We cooked together in my kitchen, the two of us moving around each other the way we used to when he was a teenager, and would help me with Sunday dinner, him chopping and me directing, the kitchen full of ordinary noise and warmth. We didn't talk about Claire. We didn't talk about attorneys or folders or legal actions or August 14th. We talked about his job, which he actually seemed to enjoy when he talked about it without the weight of everything else. We talked about my grandchildren, his sister Emma's kids, who I see every few months and who still run to the door when I arrive. We talked about the garden and what I was planning to do differently this spring. At some point during dinner, Nathan looked up from his plate and said, "Remember when I broke the kitchen window?" I laughed, actually laughed, the first real laugh I had produced in weeks. "You were 12, I said. I was throwing a baseball in the backyard and it was a perfect throw, honestly. Perfect trajectory, just in completely the wrong direction. Your father was so angry, he was so angry, and then he couldn't stop laughing. He sent me to my room and I heard him laughing through the door. We looked at each other across the kitchen table. Robert's chair was visible through the doorway. He would have handled this better than I did, Nathan said quietly. He would have said something direct and uncomfortable on day one, I agreed. And it would have been exactly right. I miss him. Me too, I said, every day. We were quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of missing the same person, Mom. Nathan set his fork down. I know there's still a lot to figure out with Claire. With everything. I don't have a clear picture of what comes next. But I want you to know that whatever comes next, I'm here. I'm actually here. Not standing in the middle of the road. I reached across the table. He took my no, I said. And I meant it. Because sometimes that is all you need. Not a resolution, not a clear picture, not the end of the story. Just the person across the table, holding your hand, telling you they're actually there. That is enough. That has always been enough. But even as I sat there holding my son's hand in my kitchen, I knew something was still unresolved. Something that has been sitting at the edge of my awareness for weeks, waiting for the right moment to step forward. Susan's case was moving, the folder was being made available. Gerald was drafting my statement, Claire had released Farrell. Nathan had asked her to leave, all of that was in motion. But Claire herself, the actual person, not the plan, not the folder, not the legal strategy. Claire was somewhere. In an apartment somewhere in Charlotte, or at a friend's house, or in her car. Somewhere carrying the weight of what she had done and what she had lost, and who she had revealed herself to be. And I did not know what I thought about that. I did not know what I felt about it. That was the truth I had been avoiding because it was the most complicated truth of all. Not the legal questions, not the house, not even Nathan. What I felt about Claire, because here is the thing about loving someone through your child, you love them in a way that has no clean category. Claire was not my daughter, she was not quite a stranger. She was the woman my son had chosen, which meant she was tangled into everything I loved most, inextricably. The way ivy grows into a wall until you cannot remove it without taking the wall with it. I had spent months protecting myself from what she was doing. I had not yet let myself sit with the grief of what she had turned out to be. That night after Nathan left, I sat in Robert's chair and I let myself feel it. The disappointment, the sadness, the particular loss of someone who could have been something good and had chosen not to be. I sat with it the way you sit with something that hurts, not amplifying it, not performing it, just letting it exist at its actual size. It was real, it was sad, and it was finished. That was the moment I knew the hardest part was behind me. Not because everything was resolved. Not because Claire had fully accounted for what she'd done, or because Nathan and I had repaired everything, or because Susan had found a new home, or because any of the practical, concrete things had reached their conclusion. But because I had sat with the hardest truth of it, the grief underneath the anger, and I had not been destroyed. I was still in my chair, in my house on Ridgeline Road. Still here. December came to Ridgeline Road the way it always does, quietly at first, then all at once. I woke up the first Monday of the month and something had shifted in the air overnight. Not cold exactly, but serious, the kind of air that means business. I made my coffee, sat at my kitchen table, opened my book, and gave myself my hour. The discipline held even through everything that had happened. Maybe especially because of everything that had happened. At 9 o'clock I put the book down and my phone rang. Gerald, the statement is ready for your review. I'm emailing it now. Take your time with it, read it carefully, change anything that doesn't sound like you, and call me when you're done. Thank you, Gerald. Also, Susan's attorney contacted me yesterday evening. The formal process is moving faster than expected. Claire responded through a new attorney, someone out of Raleigh. They're contesting the claim. I had expected that. What's their argument? That Claire communicated possibilities, not promises. That Susan acted unilaterally in giving up her apartment, and that Claire cannot be held responsible for her mother's interpretation of a preliminary conversation. The precision of the language almost impressed me. The way a lie, when dressed in legal clothing, can wear a suit and carry a briefcase and sound almost reasonable. And the folder, I asked? Nathan's documentation? Already with Susan's attorney. It is Margaret. I will be honest with you, it is quite damaging to their argument. The notes are dated. The intent is explicit. The August 14th entry alone contradicts their entire position. Good, I said. I read Gerald's statement that morning at my kitchen table, with a red pen in my hand, the way I used to grade papers back when I volunteered for the literacy program. I read it slowly. I changed 4 things, a word here, a phrase there, places where Gerald's lawyer voice had replaced my actual voice. When I was done, it read like me, clear and direct and entirely without apology. I sent it back with my changes. Then I called Nathan. How are you? I asked. Honestly strange. The apartment feels like a place I'm visiting, not a place I live. She came by Saturday to get more of her things. We didn't fight. We barely talked, which was somehow worse than fighting. What did you talk about? Logistics, the coffee maker. Whether she was taking the blue lamp, a short exhale. She asked how you were. I was quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? I told her you were fine. That you were managing everything the way you always manage everything. Another pause. She said, tell her I meant what I said in the voicemail. I told her I would. She meant it, I said. I believe she meant it. Does it change anything? I thought about that, honestly. The way I had been thinking about Claire since the night I sat in Robert's chair and let myself grieve what she had turned out to be. The grief was real and it had come and I had sat with it and it had not destroyed me. It doesn't change what happened, I said, but it matters that she said it. Those aren't contradictory. Nathan was quiet for a long time. Mom, I need to tell you something. Go ahead. I talked to a counselor this week. A therapist. I made an appointment and I went. He said it the way people say things they expect to be judged for, slightly braced. I've been going for 3 years to a place in my own head that isn't healthy. And I realized I couldn't find my way out of it on my own. Something opened in my chest, Nathan. I know, I should have done it sooner. I know, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say I'm glad. I am so glad. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for months. Maybe years. The therapist, she asked me to describe my marriage. And I started talking, and I talked for 45 minutes straight, and at the end she looked at me, and she said, "It sounds like you've been working very hard to hold something together that had some fundamental cracks in it from the start." And I sat there, because that was the truest thing anyone had said to me in a very long time. "Fundamental cracks from the start," I repeated. "Yeah. What does that mean to you?" "It means that I married someone I loved, but also someone I was always managing. Always translating for, always smoothing the edges of. And I think I confused that work for love. Because I was raised by someone who showed me that love means showing up regardless of the cost, and I applied that template to something it didn't fit." I held the phone very still, because what my son had just said was one of the most important things he had ever said to me. Not just about his marriage, about himself, about what he understood now that he hadn't understood before. "Nathan, that template showing up regardless of the cost, that is love. But it has a condition I should have made clearer to you. The condition is that the other person has to be worth the cost. Not perfect, not easy, worth it, and you are allowed to make that assessment. You are allowed to decide." He was quiet. "I'm deciding," he said finally. "Good." We talked for another half hour. About the counselor, about the apartment, about Christmas, whether it would happen, what it would look like, who would be where. We didn't solve any of it, but we talked about it honestly, which was more than we had managed in months. When we hung up, I sat with a feeling I recognized but hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, the quiet, real kind, not wishful thinking, not optimism dressed up as certainty. The kind of hope that has looked at things clearly and decided there is something worth moving toward anyway. That feeling carried me through the next 2 weeks. Susan's case moved forward. Claire's new attorney filed a response. Gerald filed a counter-response that incorporated the documentation Nathan had provided. I gave my statement. It went into the record, clean and clear, in my voice, without apology. The week before Christmas, Gerald called again. "Margaret, Claire's attorney reached out this morning. They want to settle. I had not expected it quite this fast. What are they offering?" Full reimbursement of Susan's moving expenses, 6 months of her current rental costs, and a written acknowledgement that Claire's communications to Susan were inaccurate. "The written acknowledgement," I said. "That's the important part." That was my read as well. Susan's attorney agrees. It's not a legal admission of fraud, they're careful about the language, but it is a documented, signed acknowledgement that what Claire told Susan was not accurate. Which means it exists, in writing, with signatures. I thought about Susan in her short-term rental, packing boxes she had packed once already for a home that had never been real. A 71-year-old woman who had trusted her daughter and had that trust used against her. Is Susan going to accept it? She's considering it. She asked me to tell you and see what you thought. I thought about what Susan had said, that it wasn't about the money, that it was about not letting it go unanswered, and a signed acknowledgement that it happened, that the lie was a lie, in writing, with Claire's name on it. That was an answer. Not a complete one, but a real one. I think she should accept it, I said. If the language is right, I'll relay that. He called back that afternoon. She's accepting. The settlement will be finalized before the end of the year. Good, I said, and I meant it in the full sense, not just good as in the mechanics are working out, but good as in the truth found a place to land. Good as in Susan Hartwell will have something in writing that says what was done to her was real and it was wrong. Good as in some part of this story ends with the truth acknowledged. That matters. It always matters. Christmas arrived 11 days later and it was, against all reasonable expectation, good. Not perfect. Not the Christmas I would have designed if I were designing. Emma and her family came, my daughter-in-law from my daughter-in-law situation, which is a complicated sentence that describes a genuinely uncomplicated woman. Emma had known something was wrong for months, the way Emma always knows things, and she had called me twice in November to say I'm here if you need to talk, without pushing for more than I was ready to give. Nathan came on Christmas Eve. He stayed the night in his old room, which I had not changed since he was in college, still the same navy blue bedspreads, still the same shelf of paperback novels he'd read at 16 and never taken with him when he moved out. He stood in the doorway of that room for a moment before he went to bed, looking at it the way adults look at their childhood rooms, with the specific vertigo of being simultaneously the person you were and the person you became. It's exactly the same, he said. I never had a reason to change it. He looked at me. You always thought I'd come back. I always knew you'd need somewhere to come back to. That's different. He slept in his old room on Christmas Eve. I lay awake in mine for a while and listened to the house hold both of us, the same way it had always held us, and felt the particular fullness of that my child under my roof on Christmas Eve, safe, present, finally seeing clearly. Christmas morning, Emma's family arrived at 9. 3 grandchildren, ages 6 to 11, who descended on my house with a complete disregard for adult feelings that only children under 12 can produce, and which I found, that year, to be the most restorative thing I had experienced in months. There is nothing that recalibrates your sense of what matters like a 6-year-old who needs you to explain why the ornament shaped like a pickle is on the Christmas tree and will not be redirected until you give a satisfactory answer. I explained the pickle ornament. Robert had bought it at a Christmas market in 1988 as a joke, and it had gone on the tree every year since, and whoever found it first on Christmas morning got to open the first present. This information was received with the gravity it deserved, and the 6-year-old immediately began the most methodical search for a pickle ornament I have ever witnessed. Nathan watched this from across the room, and I caught his eye, and we both almost laughed at the same moment, and did not quite, the way you don't quite when something is both funny and tender at the same time. After the children had eaten too much and opened everything and were occupied on the living room floor with the particular industry of children who have new things to figure out, Emma sat down next to me at the kitchen table. "Tell me the real version," she said quietly. Emma is 44 years old. She has her father's directness and my stubbornness, which is either a wonderful combination or an exhausting one depending on the situation. I have always trusted her completely. I told her the real version. All of it, the October afternoon, the boxes, the attorney, the conservatorship inquiry, the folder, the August notes, Susan Hartwell, the settlement, Nathan's counselor. All of it in the order it happened without softening any of it. Emma listened without interrupting, which is not her natural state. When I finished, she sat with it for a moment. "You handled this alone," she said. "I had Patrice, I had Gerald, you should have called me." "Emma, Mom." She looked at me steadily. "You are allowed to call your daughter when something like this is happening. You know that." I looked at my daughter. At the 44-year-old woman who had once been the 7-year-old who followed Nathan around insisting on doing everything he did, including climbing things that were too high for her and refusing to admit it. Who had grown into someone who shows up, who stays, who tells you the true thing even when it's uncomfortable. "I know," I said. "I think I didn't want to pull you into it while it was still, while I didn't know where it was going. And now you know where it went. Now I know." She reached over and squeezed my hand once firm, the way Emma does everything. "You're okay, I am. The house is okay, it is. And Nathan is." She glanced through the doorway at her brother, who was now on the floor with the 6-year-old attempting to assemble something that appeared to require more patience than either of them had. "Nathan is going to be okay." "Yes," I said, "I think he is." Emma went to help her children. I stayed at the table for a moment and watched my family in my house on Christmas Day, the noise, the movement, the extraordinary ordinary fullness of it, and I felt something I had been afraid, for a while, that I might not feel again. At home, completely and undeniably at home. 2 weeks into January, I got a call I had not expected. Not Gerald, not Nathan, not Susan Claire. I looked at her name on my phone screen for a full 5 seconds before I answered. Margaret Claire, a pause. I heard the settlement was finalized. Yes, I wanted to call, not to say anything about that. Just to say that I know what happened this year is something that can't be undone. And I'm not calling to ask you for anything. I learned my lesson about asking you for things. A short sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite nothing either. I wanted to hear your voice. And to tell you that I'm in therapy now, since November. And I've been doing a lot of looking at things I didn't want to look at. I'm glad, I said. Nathan told me about his counselor. We've talked a couple of times, nothing resolved, but talking. That's a start, Margaret, a pause. I don't know if there's ever a version of things where you and I don't know if I get to have a relationship with you again. After everything, I think that's your call, and I think you should take all the time you need to make it. But I wanted you to know that the woman who wrote those notes in August, I am genuinely trying not to be that woman anymore. Not for Nathan, not for you, for me, because she scared me. I held the phone. I thought about everything, not the August notes, not the moving boxes, not the legal maneuvering or the financial records or the conservatorship inquiry. I thought about the voicemail she had left me in November. The way she had sounded on it, stripped and real and without any of the armor. The way she had said, not complicated, not nuanced, wrong. I thought about what it costs to become the person who scares you, and what it costs to decide to become someone else. Claire, I said, I appreciate you calling, and I believe what you're telling me. That does not mean everything is repaired, you know that. I know, but I will tell you this. The door to this house has always been open to people who walk through it with honesty. Not performance honesty. If you find that, genuinely find it not as a strategy, not as a way back to something, but because it's who you actually want to be, then we will figure out what's possible. A long silence. That's more than I deserve, she said. Maybe, but it's what I'm offering. We said goodbye. I put the phone down. I sat in Robert's chair. The January light was coming through my windows at its particular winter angle, low and honest. The kind of light that shows everything exactly as it is. No flattery, no softness, just the true shape of things. I looked around my living room. At the mantel Claire had touched in October, thinking she was already measuring the species. Still mine. At the windows overlooking the garden, bare now but patient, waiting for spring. Still mine. At Robert's chair, solid and familiar under me, holding me the way it always had. Still mine. At all of it, the crack in the kitchen tile. The faded gray-blue shutters I had always meant to repaint. The photographs of Nathan on the hallway wall, gap-toothed and growing. The 43 years of living compressed into every corner of every room. Still mine, and something else that I had not expected to feel so clearly, so fully, on a January morning in my living room. Something that arrived not with drama, but with the quiet certainty of something that has always been true and has simply been waiting to be recognized. Gratitude, not for the fight, no one is grateful for that, but for what the fight had revealed, that I was still the person I had always hoped I was. That when it came to it, when the pressure came, I had not folded. I had not given away the thing that was mine. I had not disappeared into someone else's story about who I should be or what I should accept or how much I should be willing to sacrifice in the name of family or practicality or keeping the peace. I had stayed exactly where I was, in my house, in my life. In my own skin, I called Patrice. She picked up on the first ring because she always picks up on the first ring when she knows I might need her. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm good," I said, and this time it was the real answer. She heard it. I could tell she heard it. "Tell me." So I did. I told her about Christmas and Emma and the pickle ornament and Nathan on the living room floor with the 6-year-old. I told her about Claire's call and what I had said and what I had offered. I told her about sitting in Robert's chair and looking at my living room and feeling, for the first time in months, completely at peace inside my own walls. Patrice listened the way she has always listened, entirely, without rushing me toward any conclusion, without offering me the comfort before I finished earning it. When I was done, she said, "Mag, you know what you did this year? Tell me, you stood in the middle of a storm and you didn't move. You didn't brace so hard you broke, and you didn't bend so far you disappeared. You stayed where you were." I looked at Robert's chair. "At all of it." "Yeah," I said, "I did. Robert would be so proud of you." The words landed in my chest somewhere deep and real. "I know," I said. "I think he would." We talked for another half hour about nothing important, about everything that mattered. When we said goodbye, I put the phone down and sat in the quiet for a moment. Then I got up, put on my coat, and went out to the garden. January garden, bare and cold and patient. My hands in the earth, doing the work you do in winter, preparing, tending, trusting that what you put in the ground now will come back in spring. It has always come back. 43 years of springs in this garden, and it has always come back. I worked for an hour, my hands got cold, I did not stop. Because this is who I am, this is what I do. I show up in the cold, and I do the work, and I trust the ground. When I went back inside, I took off my coat and put on the kettle and stood at my kitchen window and looked at my garden. And I said out loud to no one and to Robert and to the house that had held me through everything, "I am still here." That is the whole story. Not the story of a woman who was wronged and survived it, though that is also true. Not the story of a family that broke and began slowly to repair, though that is also true. Not the story of a house that was nearly taken and was not, though that is also true. The real story is this. A woman who spent 43 years building a life learned, in the hardest possible way, that the life she had built was worth protecting. That her home was not just walls and floors and a cracked kitchen tile. That her dignity was not a negotiating position. That her love for her son did not require her to vanish. That her open heart did not mean an open door to people who wanted to take what was hers. A person's kindness should never become an invitation for others to control them. A parent's love should never mean losing themselves. And a home is not just where you live. A home is where you decide every single day who you are. I decided I am Margaret Collins. I am 69 years old. I am a widow and a mother and a grandmother and a gardener and a reader and a woman who volunteers at the library on Wednesday mornings and makes chicken soup in November and has a crack in her kitchen tile that she is never going to fix. I live on Ridgeline Road, in the house my husband built, in the life I have earned, and I am not going anywhere.